editorial. This week is an important milestone. It's a 50-year celebration of the voluntary army here in America. This is part of the tradition of chivalry, the Continental Army, both in America and in Europe. The origin of the draft of impressment. Impressment was the 18th century word, traces back to King George III of the British Navy, who would impress, and that was a pejorative term, impressing America's youth was to force them into the British Royal Navy, something that was opposed. It was central to the Declaration of Independence. The effort by colonists and also our European brethren, of which were Lithuanian, Prussian, French, eventually Dutch, joined us on ending this tradition of impressment in an experiment that we called the American Revolution. If it makes sense racing knights into war, voluntarily or otherwise, it makes sense racing knights into fighting disease, parasites, viruses. Rengen, Rengen, Rengen. The knights from range originates from the ancient Jagfetic word Rengen. Rengen means knight. It's a knight by range. You could imagine by bow and arrow. Also artillery. Those that were on the European continent and also the American continent after 1773. This traces back in recorded history to there's a horse shepherd 3,400 years ago from Jagfetic places. That's the language. Some people call it Proto-Indo-European. Some modern observers might call it Ancient Lithuanian. That horse shepherd arose to be Rengen, held the title Master of the Horse, was the king's lieutenant, was known as Pharaoh Yuya, or as we say in Lithuanian, Hionis. In Greek, they would call him John. In Aramaic, they would call him John, Ionis, Ionis. We might know him today as John the Baptist, John the Evangelist, John of Patmos. The author of Revelations was a horse shepherd. His name was Ionis. It's not a surprise. Not everybody knew that he was a pharaoh of Egypt. We know because his tomb was left in the Valley of Kings. He is a Jagfetic person. Regentin, Rengen, Hippocrates. These are the knights of America's founding, which are a part of that tradition that goes back to John of Patmos, John the Evangelist, John the Baptist, Hionis. Regentin is the Dutch word. Rengen is the Prussian word or the European continental word. Hippocrates is the Greek. And these, in that order, mean riparian, by the sea. In the case of the Dutch, ranged. In the case of the Prussian, Regen or Rengen. And Hippocrates, which is the Greek, superior in horses. Those forces were multifunctional. They're alive and well in the American Revolution. We know them today not as Regentin, but as United States Marine Corps. Not as Rengen, but as United States Army Rangers. And not as Hippocrates, but as physicians. Marines, Rangers, physicians sacrificed their youth and treasure for us, for America, as part of the three totally separate caste systems of the ancient world, which function well and still do. The U.S. Marines over what's called riparian law, law of the seas, law of the ports, castle law, in the case of U.S. Army Rangers, and epidemiological law in the case of physicians. These are the battlefields of the 21st century. Jagiellonian law is the way we win. Jagiellonian law is the ancient Lithuanian or Jagfetic, is the ancient language of horse shepherds, tracing all the way back to the first knight. The horse is really America. The horse is from here. Not everybody knows there were hunters that came to America and hunted America's horse to extinction. The brothers and sisters of that horse escaped out Varangia, on down Siberia, into the outstretched hands of my ancestor and yours, the first knight, who said, "What did they do to you, girl?" That began the revolution in shepherds, the revolution in horse shepherds in particular, and the rebirth of wonder in this experiment we call the continents, whether it be Europe or America. The Brandenburg Gate was built because all the shepherds of all the continents united to defeat the Dutch. See, the Dutch were the pirates of the 18th and 17th century. The Dutch West India colony held a fort, held a manor right in Albany, New York. For those of you that pay taxes in the state of New York, you might think they might not have ever left. That happens to be the tradition of taxation in the state of New York. They also held an imperial base in New Amsterdam. And back in Europe, in Holland, the Berlin Opera House was part of a neoclassical movement of horse shepherds in music, design, and Rengen. That included Mozart, Beethoven, Regentin, Rengen, Hippocrates. Those were the knights that came to America all in the same generation. And these knights are what we owe our founding. Were the knights that came in neoclassical design, neoclassical columns, in neoclassical style. Not just in music, but in the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, and the U.S. Constitution. This roster that we need today for perfecting the brand American medicine is that of knights in this old tradition of Rengen, of Regentin, of Hippocrates. There were 65 to 102 other Good Shepherd traditions from other tribes. The Dutch were only one of them. They didn't love their Marines enough. Not everybody knows that the Dutch had a Marine Corps. They had the Dutch Merchant Marines. The Dutch West India colonies were here in the Western Hemisphere. The Dutch East India Company was in the Eastern Hemisphere. They were notably stubborn. The Regentin, the Dutch Merchant Marines lost many of their homes prior to 1787. Many of them were burned to the ground by the Dutch in their messy revolution prior to the Batavian Republic. Not everybody knows that at the end of the American Revolution, there was a revolution in the Netherlands, basically to overturn the aristocracy there. It's a period of time called as the Batavian Republic, where they instilled Batavian Knights, Rengen, you'd call them U.S. Army Rangers, on the ground in the Netherlands to implement the rules of the rest of the continents, which included Europe, everybody east of the Rhine, and France, and us in the United States of America. The Regentin, the Dutch Merchant Marine, were revered here. They helped us win our revolution. They helped us in our major ports in Boston, in New York. The Dutch Merchant Marine became the United States Marine Corps. The Dutch didn't love them enough. We did. We still do. We're going to keep them. You can't have them. The Batavians were another one of the Good Shepherd traditions, one of the other tribes out of the 65 to 102 other traditions. The Batavians came to America in 1773, built West Point. That is an apodium, is an ancient style of castle that includes an academy and a mint. Those types of apodium are built all over Europe. The fortification at West Point is a classic Batavian apodium. The Batavians brought to the American Revolution artillery. There are 3-inch Napoleon rifled artillery and other Rengen. Farmers didn't spontaneously enter the rifled Iron Age in the 18th century. They didn't spontaneously start building artillery. There were Lithuanian knights from Europe that joined us. Those knights have largely not had their story told because they happen to be national secrets. National secrets have been kept for 250 years. We know that there are Rengen here. There are Lithuanians, Prussian, French. The Batavians brought us neoclassical design. The United States Capitol, downtown Philadelphia, downtown New York, where you see neoclassical design in the 19th century and the early 20th century, you're looking at that neoclassical movement that traces back to Lithuanians, to Prussians. They were doing the same thing at the same time. The Batavians ended impressment into the British Navy. There are a lot of tribes that help with that. It's not clear what the count is because there were generals of the Continental Army, which meant Europe and America. They were involved in defeating the British, that were unified under a single tribe name called Prussian, of which, after the defeat of the Dutch, it included Dutch, French, German, Polish, Lithuanian, Russian. The whole of the European continent fought under a single tribe, under a single cause. A gentleman by the name of Frederick William II. Frederick William II was the King of Prussia. There are history books that describe there being a Prussian scheme to replace the British crown with the Prussian one. Of course, the Prussians, the Lithuanians, the Germans settled in Pennsylvania. That we know. We know that the Continental Congress spontaneously arose with those Prussians in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in particular, in the Lehigh Valley. And the British complained, something that's codified in our Declaration of Independence, that, gee, there's a lot of Prussians here. Boy, there's a lot of Lithuanians, Germans here in America. What are they doing here? Of which the Batavians knew. The Prussians won the 7 Years' War. That included all of the French holdings in the New World. That included all of New France. The Prussians came and risked it all to join us in our revolution against the British, and fundamentally believed that the Admiralty courts were wrong. It's difficult to imagine today that there's an Admiralty court in every town and every city in America to impress our youth into the British Royal Navy, something that Frederick William II fundamentally disagreed with, something that other knights, other Rengen, and ultimately the Dutch Regenten joined us in that cause. There were an untold number of tribes that joined us in our revolution. We know because we had the latest of European technology as early as 1773. You can go to West Point today and see examples of Prussian-style wheeled artillery, something the British didn't have, something the Dutch didn't have. Those folks put all their cannons on ships. Their economies depended on it. Our revolution came from the continent. As we're here celebrating 50 years of our volunteer army, that volunteer army didn't spontaneously begin in 1773. It didn't spontaneously begin in 1973. It began in 1773, where we resisted British impressment. And so, as you say a prayer today, this weekend, for our United States Marine Corps, for our United States Army Rangers and other branches of the military, you can also say it for their ancient predecessors, the Regenten, who were the Dutch that joined us, the Rengen, who are the ancient ranged knights, and Hippocrates, those physicians that are superior in